So YouTube is a great place to learn about new kinds of gear, new ways to film, new ways to light, new ways to shoot, pretty much anything you could ever want to know, whether inside of the camera world or outside. However, it has kind of become detrimental to young filmmakers as well, because there's a lot of bad information out there from people who do know what they're doing, but haven't necessarily done enough or experienced, an actual set in the right way to effectively give correct advice on a matter for you. I think generally there's this oversimplified opinion about certain topics such as lighting, color grading the camera you should use, the lenses you should use, the format of the sensor you should use, whether that's Super 35, APS-C, or full frame, or larger. I think it's generally emphasized that bigger is better, and that's simply not true. So we talk about rigging our cameras a lot. I think we talk about them a little too much, actually. I think when we talk to rigging your camera, it's all about, oh, do you have this matte box, these filters, this top handle, these batteries, and if you don't do it how I'm doing it, it's wrong because it's not the best. And everybody likes to add well, this is best for me at the end of the day, but at the end of the day, they're pitching their rig to you. So what does that really say about people's influence on how every other YouTube cinematographer builds their rig? It says that it's copy and paste, and I don't think that that's the right way to go about it. I think the most common myth about rigging is the fact that you need to. You simply don't. Now, most of us professionals shooting on sets every week do rig our cameras out pretty extensively. However, when I go out and shoot B-roll like this, a lot of the times I won't bring a top handle, a follow focus, sometimes not even a matte box or a V-mount battery. Sometimes I literally run my camera, my cage, and a lens and like an ND filter, and that's it. I, of course, almost always have a monitor on top, and I think as a professional, you should, especially if you're pulling focus manually, or there might be a situation where you need to take over for your autofocus. I think having a monitor is a must-have, but outside of that, I'm not sure that everything everybody sells you as a necessity is a necessity, and I think that needs to be thought about a little bit more before you go out buying expensive gear that you really don't need. I think at the end of the day, think about the things you need, the things you use, and if you've bought something, do you use it? If you bought something for the features it has, do you use it? I know a lot of people for their FX3s and other cameras will get the Atomos Ninja 5 to record external RAW. But if you don't use that, was it worth the purchase? If not, then you've been sold another YouTube rigging lie, and those things need to be thought out before you buy. I think one of our biggest problems right now in the cinema side of YouTube is breathing room. Now, what do I mean by breathing room? What do I mean is RAW, bit depth, dynamic range, and resolution. I think these are all things that are good in their own right, but they're very expensive. A lot of times they only come with cameras that are honestly way out of most of our budgets. They're just too far gone. Nobody's buying a red V-Raptor XL for their own personal production company to shoot weddings and commercials with. I think if you're at that point, you're probably not looking to YouTube for answers at this point. You're probably looking to your friends who are shooting commercials, movies, and a bunch of other stuff actively in the industry. You're not looking to YouTube for those answers nearly as much. So where does that leave us who do look to YouTube for answers a lot of the times? I think for us, we like that breathing room because it allows mistakes, and that is a good thing, but that leads to giving us this idea that we're sculpting our image in post, and that is not a good thing. You should be sculpting your image on set, day of. That means if your dynamic range isn't great on your camera, make sure your contrast ratio isn't too large. If you're indoors, it's totally controllable. If you're outside, there are definitely things you can do to mitigate that. If you have a good grip and electric team, then they should be able to handle that no problem. If you're solo shooting by yourself, there's still steps you can take to do that, such as shooting in log, using something like a flex fill to bounce light. There are all these steps you can take using diffusion in order to make sure that contrast ratio isn't too high for your camera's dynamic range. The other thing that I see a lot that's really pushed hard, especially with Blackmagic on the scene, is resolution. We're hearing that you must have 6K these days, when in reality, you don't even need 4K. For a large part of my filming career, I shot on 1080p, upscaled it to 4K, and it looked better than a lot of naturally 4K cameras because it had a good bit rate. And at the end of the day, bitrate probably matters more than anything else, along with dynamic range. However, you don't need anything crazy. Almost any camera these days will shoot 4K at a good enough bitrate to do just about anything. And when it comes to shooting RAW, I think that it's simply overhyped. I've shot about every kind of RAW there is, from shooting B-RAW natively to B-RAW with video assist, using Red Code RAW, using Airy RAW, using the RAW from the EOS M's Magic Lantern, using it from the Atomos Ninja 5 with an FX3. Some of those options are great. Some of those work better than others. Some of those I would use again, and some of those I would not. There are a lot of movies out there that aren't even shot with Airy RAW, despite them using Airy Alexas. And at the end of the day, it just sometimes is the better option. I think a lot of times that it's pushed really, really hard. You must be shooting RAW, otherwise you're not giving your client the best there is. At the end of the day, 4K with 10-bit and a good bit rate will get you 99% of where you need to go. It's only with really pushed images that you need that extra push or extra step. And honestly, it's just a safety net in order to change things in post if the DP isn't that experienced. Another big lie that's talked about on YouTube a lot is gimbals. And gimbals are incredibly useful, and I almost always have one in my bag because I almost always need one. However, the fact that you need to use one for anything more than 50% of your shots is an absolutely ridiculous idea. There are some times where a tripod, a dolly, or honestly just shooting handheld or handheld with support is just a better option. If you need to convey action and quick emotions, such as, I shoot a lot of weddings, I always shoot the receptions handheld, never on a gimbal. And I shoot the ceremony almost always on a gimbal. There is a time and a place for it, and I think that in today's day and age, because I found cheap, accessible, and honestly good that gimbals are, they're overused, and it's seen as just a fix-all tool. And when you shoot things like documentaries or commercials, in documentaries, you don't always have the time to adjust your gimbal to get the shot you need, so you have to shoot handheld. And with commercials, sometimes you just have the time to be able to set up a dolly, so you don't even need a gimbal at all, and the dolly is just a better tool for the job. Same goes with handheld and tripod. There's almost always a better tool than the job for the gimbal. It's just whether that job allows for you to use a different tool. A gimbal is a tool, and it should be used as such in the right situation. You don't want to drive a screw-in with a hammer. Another, let's say, misconception I see on YouTube a lot is what kind of lens choice / focal length to use. Wide angle lenses is definitely something that has been picked up by a lot of people, and it's an issue actually. Aside from whether you use cinema or photo glass, your focal length matters just a little bit more. I see a lot of people shooting on 24-70 lenses for both sports and weddings. It's great, other than the fact that they only shoot at 24 or 70. All the focal lengths in between seem to be tossed out the window, because if you're gonna shoot it at 50, well, just pull out a fast 50 you have in your backpack. Don't use the 24-70, but that's too much of a hassle, so nobody actually does it. I think choosing primes, especially cinema primes, forces you to put yourself in maybe an awkward position, but in a position where it allows you to get creative. For example, right now I'm shooting on a 65mm lens, and it can be used for that wide you just saw, or this close-up. It's an interesting lens because it can do both. It's kind of meant to do one thing, but with a good creative vision, you can do different things it wasn't necessarily intended for, but we're creatives. Since when do we stick to the rules? Now, kind of in the same vein as lenses, but a little bit different, is lighting and coloring. And those two go very hand in hand with your lens choice. I think on YouTube, there's a discussion about lighting, but it's not very in-depth, and it's usually how-to tutorials, not why you should. And as I've talked previously with things such as dynamic range, resolution, the bit depth of your camera, again, great things to have, but with lighting, none of them really matter if you know what you're doing on set. I think that number one, choosing the right lights and putting them in the right places with the right intensities can solve a lot of your coloring issues. And jumping into post, when you do your coloring, you're usually just pushing the lights you had on set to where you were envisioning them on set if you couldn't quite get it there. Now, coloring is a creative process, and there are creative turns to be made, and sometimes when you get to post, you realize that you should change something that you didn't on set and you didn't think about because you were busy thinking about something else. But it's still an important tool, and they're not really taught that they go hand in hand. If you want, kind of a green, grungy look in the shadows, something like the Joker, That's not a coloring process. That's pushed in coloring, but what you should be doing on set is pushing out green lights or throwing green gels on your lights. It's always possible to do. It's actually relatively cheap, and it's gonna save you some headache in post. And if you have a camera that shoots only 8-bit, it's still very doable to get that look, but that's not taught on YouTube. YouTube, all in all, is a very great place to learn new things and experiment with ideas that maybe you don't have the gear to put to application yourself. However, I think it's very wise to take things in little bites and not take everything you see as truth. We are all creators just expressing our opinion, and some of us push that opinion a little harder than just an opinion and sometimes take it to be factual. At the end of the day, you're a creative. With the tools at your disposal, you can use them in very different ways. And sometimes when you have tools that maybe aren't as powerful as the tools other people have, you can achieve the same results because you have to think outside of the box. Usually people with the most expensive gear, the nicest stuff, and the freebies from a lot of these companies, they don't have to think outside of the box. So they don't, and sometimes they miss some real key points of that creative ideal that we all strive for as cinematographers. So take the gear you have and the knowledge you have, honestly just learn from YouTube and from other people and apply it to yourself. Don't just take what you see on the internet as truth, because most of the time it's not.